Okay, let's talk about some logistics before we get rolling. Next month, November 16th, we have the great good fortune of having Emily Sutton, who is the executive director of the Haw River Assembly, with us. We're talking about rivers. Emily wants us down on the river, okay? So if you look on the class website under water quality, you'll see where, you'll see the information about the site. We're going to be at a location on the Lower Haw, all right? Matt, who is a space guru, is working some magic to see if he can get his hands on a building in case it rains, okay? Because there's just not enough time during that period of the year to have a rain date, right? Because we're right on top of the holidays and da-da-da-da-da. So, what we are planning, and as the logistics firm up, I'm going to get that information to you. But we're on the 16th. We're going to be at a location at the Lower Haw. We're outside. Not a classroom, not a pavilion. So if you have, or you can borrow like a folding chair or a lawn chair. You might want to throw it in the back of your car, because otherwise you're going to be on your feet. We'll do some talk time, and we'll do some work time. Okay? Emily wants you all experiencing the kind of work that the Haw River does. So, yes, I know it is November, and yes, I know we're talking about possibly getting wet. But you all did this back in February, and we had you marching around the woods, right? Or no, it was January. And it threw Ashley into yeah, the whole thing. So, more details to follow. When you get those really long, tedious emails from me, please read them. We'll have the information about that. There's parking, but not an abundance of parking there. So you might think about carpooling with a buddy, okay? Or maybe meeting at a site, carpooling in. Okay, so more, stay tuned. Thank you for those of you who have sent me information about your impact projects. Some of you have already given me a write-up with pictures, which is lovely. We are starting to compile all that. It'll be something, we're doing multiple things with those descriptions. One, I'd like to compile that and be able to share that with you during our celebration class in December, so you can see what everybody's done. Also, we want to start, Ashley is cranking up the extension media machine and getting good work out there to the world, so the world can see the kinds of things you all have been doing. And then also in January 2025, which we're almost there, the Orange County class, Desiree and Jen, wave your hands, are kicking off. And we're going to be inviting you to come and talk about your projects, but also we want to be able to provide the 2025 class with information about what you all did. Because you might remember way back in January how frustrated a number of you were, because like, what am I going to do? All right? So we want to be able to give them good examples about what you all did. So if you haven't already done so, please get me a short and, no stress, like 100 words. I mean, you don't have to write a book, but please send me a description about what you've done. If you're working in a team, just one person has to send it. And please, if you're in a team, list all the team members for us. Pictures would be lovely. Pictures that kind of tell the story about your project. Pictures of people, like your team or yourself, would be even better. But please try to get that information to me as soon as you've got it. Now, a number of you your projects are in progress, so it might be kind of like a status report with a completion date, in the future. So, Ashley.
One request I have for your 100 words is that if you can, some of you will already have done this, but not everyone thinks this way because we get in the weeds. If you can start your description with like a big picture, what is the problem? Right? Because when we start compiling these and we start sharing them out, it's really, really helpful to know not just, I removed invasives at this site, but like invasives at this site have been a long-running problem. We're concerned about it for reasons X, Y, Z, so this is what I did, right? So a little bit of big picture orientation at the beginning is very, very helpful.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect. Okay. Jeannie, did you have a comment? Any questions, comments? Did I see a hand going?
So if we've already turned it in, will you let us know if we need to edit it or revise it then?
Yeah, I might come back with like a couple questions if we end up using it as like a story that we share out more broadly. That's not about your writing. You guys, I'm sure, are great. It's just me trying to like get it into the format that I know like they like to see.
pitch in the story. Okay, so today is going to be super cool and hard. All right, so buckle up, because this is going to be hard. We have spent 10 months looking at the natural world, all right? And today you're going to be in a situation where we're asking you to balance the needs of the natural world with humans, okay? So your objective today is to be able to put on or think through the values of people on the other side of the table and help them understand why this matters. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a minute. Couple things just to be aware of. We're going to spend, when we go to do a case study work, we're going to spend about 15, 20 minutes together as groups. You're going to think of 2 to 4, and I'll go through this again, but you're going to think of 2 to 4 key points in your group, and you're going to get 5 or 10 minutes to talk about it, all of us. This will make more sense in a minute, but I want you to have these numbers kind of in your head, okay? Now, the cool part of today, the really cool part of today, Bo House, who's hiding over there in the corner, who is the, I've got to do your whole title, Director of Land Protection. That doesn't sound like you should have a cape. Director of Land Protection Stewardship for the West, which I'm not sure what West is, you'll tell us, with the Triangle Land Conservancy. All right, TLC, as many of you know, been here since what, the 80s. Amazing organization. They have this audacious goal of conserving 25,000 acres by 2025, and you're well on your way to making that happen.
So we crossed our goal a year early.
Wow.
He's gonna-
So this spring, is about July.
So maybe you'll do like 30,000 acres.
See, that's the one who has to do it. Has to push back.
Okay, all right. So anyways, Bo is going to be talking to us about the tools of conservation. The case study that we're going to work through is a different sort of situation, but the tools are very similar, okay? So Bo's going to talk to us about what TLC does, the tools of conservation, and how you can make a difference. How each one of us can help with this, all right? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bo.
Super, thank you. I'm glad I'm not the torturous part of our day. I read that, I heard that, and I was like, wow, that'll be, my part's not that hard. It's kind of fun, but, so anyway, yes, I'm Bo Howes with Triangle Land Conservancy. I just entered my 16th year with TLC. And my role largely is land protection. So my title is Land Protection Stewardship. I supervise the folks on the western part of the triangle. So for TLC, we have 6 counties that we work on in, and the west is not, Colorado or Bozeman, Montana, or those places. The west is Chatham and Lee and Durham and Orange County. So the east for us is Johnston and Wake County. So I spend most of my time in Orange and Durham County, and then some in Chatham and Lee counties. But we have other staff who help with that. But that's how we define the West. And I do spend like most of my time doing land protection projects. That is largely, and then supervision, which it's kind of funny how you stay places longer, and it's like the work is here, like the land protection work, and then the management of people is over here, and they kind of go up, and you do more managing of people, and it's fun, and actually I've done this personality study thing that they have us go through, and apparently I really do enjoy mentoring people. So, and I wouldn't have said that before I had this thing. So that's what I do, and I enjoy it. A little bit about my background: I did grow up in Chapel Hill. Lived there since I was 5, but I went away to college, and then I practiced law for 15 years, and then was pretty burned out by that, and so I left the law practice and started doing project work at TLC, and I've been at TLC pretty much ever since then. Triangle Land Conservancy, about us, like we said, 1983. Ironically, the year I graduated from high school. So anyway, we have 8 open nature preserves. Oftentimes people, that's what you're most familiar with when you talk about a land conservancy, because it's how we interact with the public. The one, Horton Grove here in Durham. Are people from all around the Triangle of Durham, or?
Durham and Chatham.
Durham and Chatham, okay. So Chatham, White Pines, Nature Preserve is there, but also the other ones that we have, Brumley Forest, those places. Currently conserve 25,000 acres of land. We were talking about that, our goal that we met a year early, which is pretty fantastic. We're updating our strategic plan, so I don't have the next big audacious goal. The number that would go would be, 30,000 by 2030 if you just did exactly what we're continuing to do. But what we're finding is, because of the way our area is urbanizing, there are not as many large projects, right? They're still big projects, but they're fewer. And so our pace of conservation may well go down. And it may be, and we'll talk about, what conservation values a little bit later, but the conservation value of, say, a 20-acre parcel in rural Chatham County is not nearly as high as a 20-acre parcel that's in, say, urban Durham County. And so we have to talk about our priorities and how we figure out what we're going to work on. And we look at those conservation values, but we'll look at things like, the size of the property may be smaller. But as y'all all know, land has intrinsic value that goes beyond just the acreage. So, just a little bit of history. I don't know if any of y'all know anything about the Mountains of Sea Trail, but this here is TLC's first paid employee, and that's Kate Dixon, who for a long time was the executive director of the Mountains of Sea Trail, who was also TLC's executive director. That's from 1993. Here are our open nature preserves. So this map shows you kind of where each of them is and what they're about. We have McKeever Landing down here. I don't know if anybody's been there lately. It's pretty rough. It's really just a paddle access for the deep river. It's still on our map, but don't go there. It's just, it's 5 acres, so there's not much there. It's really a paddle access, but the deep river is really flashy. And so you get some really steep banks, and it's really hard to put your boat in the water. But the good news is, right about here, like within a half a mile, I'm doing a project that will bring us 70 acres right on the deep river upstream, and we'll put a new paddle access in there. And so it's one of those things where, like, oh, we did this project years ago, way before I started working at TLC, but now we're replacing it with an even better space. And then these orange dots are our open nature preserves. The other ones that have the little hikers on are projects that are owned by somebody else. So like Orange County, Durham County, or both of them in the case up there with Little River, places where we were involved in the process, but we didn't we don't own the property. So those are our open nature preserves. We got to talk about our vision statement and our mission statement and those things, because that's what we do. I, for one, can never remember these things like word for word, and I'm not going to read it to you, but what this thing does, it reflects what we call our 4 public benefits. And so like these last 4 things in there are all part of our public benefits. Mission statement's even harder because it's more words, but it's remarkable to look. And I was looking back at something from like the early 90s, and our mission statement is really similar now as it was then. And we've gone through at least 4 strategic plans, and every time you do a strategic plan, you kind of get those out and you look at them, and you kind of live by them anyway, but it's been tweaked a number of years, but it's essentially the same as we've been doing since we started. So how do we protect land? The mission vision that does that, but this, how do we do it? We own land, so fee simple acquisition, and it says acquisition. We buy it sometimes, it's donated to us sometimes, it's left to us in wills, but these are properties that TLC owns. Right now we're at about, I think, 8,500 acres or so across the triangle, of which maybe half, maybe a little bit less is open to the public, something along those lines. A lot of our land is not open to the public. It's a little too sensitive. There's this great property in northern Wake County that we call Temple Flat Rocks, and it has these big exposed granitic rocks, and they have these lichens on. These lichens are hundreds of years old, and if you walk across them, you kill them. So we don't let people go there. There are occasional guided walks out there, so if you kind of troll the TLC website and find out about it, but you can only take 15 people at a time, so you really do have to hit it just right when you go out, when you find out about those ones. But if you ever hear about it, or if you ever really want to go, just call me, because I like going out there. It's neat. It's a cool space, and we don't really want to keep people away, but we want people to be respectful and not walk where they're not supposed to walk. And then there's conservation easements. So is everybody familiar at all with the conservation easement? No. Okay, good, because I'm going to talk about it a lot in a minute. I was a little worried y'all were too advanced. Conservation easement, somebody else owns the land. The typical case you think about is a farmer. So like a farmer owns the land, he or she enters into an agreement with TLC. TLC owns now the development rights to that property, so you can't subdivide it, and it kind of governs the uses of what you can do on that piece of property. But the farmer still owns the property, still can farm it, depending on what it is. You put restrictions on it, so if there's like a stream that goes through it, you'll say, oh wait, if you have cattle, you're going to keep that cattle 100 feet away from any stream bank, that kind of thing. Those restrictions are varied. They change with each individual project, but they're there, and it's something that you work with the landowners to determine which ones are most appropriate. Yes?
Is there usually money involved with that?
Yeah, so
Yes.
maybe. And with every conservation project, there are donors who really love their land and want to protect their land, and they will give TLC the easement for tax benefits and because they want their land to stay the same. There are a bunch of state programs, and we're going to talk as we go through about the different funding mechanisms. So there's the North, staying on the farm theme, there's the North Carolina Ag Trust Fund. That fund gets money every year from the legislature. It's like $14 million this year for the entire state. They will purchase the conservation easement, but always with some kind of donative component to it. Yes?
But there's usually a cost to the person getting the easement, correct?
It depends. So, and what do you mean by cost?
Well, there's the attorney, there's
Yes.
survey, the.
Yes. So yes, there are transaction costs, and we will talk at length about those, like a whole slide on the transaction cost. But yes, there is a cost that has to be paid. TLC needs stewardship money to take care of, we have an obligation with any conservation easement. We have to go to that property at least once a year, make sure that the terms of the easement have not been violated. So we have to send a staff member out there or send somebody out there, and we have to process a report. We have to turn it into the ag ADFP, and so it is the average cost, transaction cost, is between $25,000 and $50,000 for the now. A really big property, the survey can be $50,000. The most expensive survey I've ever paid for was $73,000, and that was just for the survey, nothing else. They were remarkable, and that was in 2010.
And who pays that cost?
Depends. Sometimes there's granting agencies that do. Sometimes the landowners do. In that case, it was the state through the Land and Water Fund that paid that. We'll talk a little bit about budgets as we go through. So the third way that you do things are transfers or assists. Those are things where, like at the Haw River, where y'all are going to be next month, TLC was heavily involved in the protection of the lower Haw Slopes recreation area. So that space that's now owned by state parks and run as a natural, part of the natural area, state recreation area is what it's called. Anyway, we were involved. Duke Forest owned that property and was going to sell it on the open market. We brokered a deal and did some grant making or grant applications. So the state ended up buying it from Duke Forest. And that's a transfer assist. That's relatively small. Back with our easements we're probably over 10,000 acres in easements. Transfers and assists, we are probably at about 5,000 or 6,000 acres, give or take. And sometimes those numbers don't all add up to 25 because there are things that fit in more than one bucket. So don't check my math too closely. We have this whole database that you can slice and dice your numbers about any way you want to, which is great. So here are the 4 benefits that I mentioned earlier: safeguarding clean water, protecting natural habitats, supporting local farms and food, and then connecting people with nature. Any project that we do, we will look at and we will assess the conservation values of the property, kind of through the lens of these different public benefits, is what we call them. It was interesting when this concept first came around for us. It was about 2009, and I was involved in the process. And we started off with, I think it was 16 public benefits, and we started lumping them together. And we eventually got down to 4 that we felt like encompassed everything that we were interested in making sure we highlighted. And so then our different documents that we use when we're assessing projects all kind of reference these things, but then they'll have these subfolders in it. So, like if it's clean water, is it a headwater stream? Is it a drinking water stream? Is it a 303? 303D is a listing by the EPA that's impaired. So is it a 303D stream? All these different things, and we don't actually assign them points, but we do talk about them and decide what's most important and how we're going to spend our time. And y'all did ask questions, which is great. Please feel free, ask a question anytime. It's great. Don't mind any interruptions. So the 4 public benefits. A little bit further on those. These are just examples. We'll go through these relatively quickly, but they're the things you would think about. But like Jordan Lake watershed, we've been intimately involved in organizing ways to protect the Jordan Lake watershed. So looking at the downstream users, looking at like Cary and Apex, who get most of their water from that space. The concept is they should be paying for upstream protection. Right? They should be, and they've been receptive to it. We did our first project with Cary. It's the Big Woods Forest project, but I think one of y'all is doing work in this class on that project. It's one next to Farrington. But Jordan Lake, we do that, and then we've been for a long time, since before I started at TLC, we've been working with the city of Raleigh on a similar concept. They were the first ones, really the first ones nationally to do this, where they looked at, and for them, it was the city of Raleigh. It's very difficult if you're a city in North Carolina to buy property outside of the county in which you are in. So for Raleigh to buy property in Durham is difficult. For Raleigh to give TLC money to buy property in Durham is not hard at all. And so we set up this coalition, and the Eno River Association is in it, the Triangle Land Conservancy is in it, Ellery Creek watershed. We all use this fund. They put about between $2 and $3 million a year in land conservation upstream from Falls Lake. So we've been involved in that for a long time. We do lots of partnership work and outreach work and things like that. Protecting natural habitats. Some of us come to these things, to conservation in different paths. I know Saw here is a bird person like me, and if you ask me, like if I'm sitting at a bar, how did I get into land conservation, and I've had like 3 beers, I'm likely to tell you, well, I'm really interested in bird habitat. That's like the number one. So we're not supposed to rank our public benefits. But if you want to know mine, it's natural habitats, and it's like keeping the humans away is okay with me, really. Not really. So, but it's bird habitat that I'm particularly interested in. It's what brought me into this, and now I'm much more excited about land conservation in general. Supporting local farms and food. We do an awful lot of work in this context, but it's stuff that you don't see in public very much because it's largely conservation easements, which generally are not open to the public. And it's working with individual farmers and protecting their land. And so if you drive by, there's probably a sign, and it's probably about that big. It's not big enough for really to see. And we talk about it in our material a lot, but it's one of the things you just don't see as much. So supporting local farms and food, and then connecting people with nature, which for us is largely the open nature preserves, but we also have an education department who does things with young people and does field trips and all kinds of stuff. So connecting people, we oftentimes look at it as if people don't have opportunities to be in nature, they're not going to care enough to to step out and to give us money so that we can protect it. You know, we're a not-for-profit. We're always looking for people to give us money. That's what we do. But that's, you know, connecting people with nature. I talked a little bit before about conservation priorities. This is actually the Raleigh Watershed Protection Program. It used to be known as the Upper Neuse Clean Water Initiative. Neither really rolls off the tongue, you know, but I'm not marketing. It's okay. But, you know, this shows you the outline of this watershed, right? So anywhere in there, we do projects, and I can't remember the number, but all of us together are something like 50 projects that we've done, if not more, in that area. It's a pretty astounding number. When you get, if I was any good, I'd have looked it up before I came here, but I didn't. But you can look at things like, this is Brumley Forest, that are the Brumley Nature Preserve. You know, this is Eno River State Park. Clearly that wasn't all done with Raleigh money, but part of it was done with Raleigh money. Eno River Association has their confluence, which is, maybe that's it right there. And then there's just a bunch of smaller projects. This is also a relatively old map, so it doesn't have all of our projects on it, or our partners' projects. But when we talk about conservation priorities, and I've already touched on it a few times, it's how we're going to spend our time. You know, there's a limited, TLC now has 30 employees, 32 employees, which is as high as it's ever been. When I started at TLC, I was the 26th employee, I think. We got down to 12 in the worst part of the financial crash of 2000, I guess it's 2012, so we kind of lagged behind. I started to recover, but we got down. And that's, that people weren't giving as much money, we couldn't keep staff. But we have to spread ourselves over the entire region. We have to figure out where we're going to spend our money, where we're going to spend our time, because time is the important part. And we figured out that, if you think about buying a house, it takes a while to do that transaction. To do a land conservation project, which is largely the same, similar thing, we figured out that we could, reasonably, an individual person who's doing those projects can't do more than maybe 10 or 12 at any one time. If you have more than that, and all of us actually have more than that going on, but somebody is not getting the attention they need. It's the way it is. So we have to spend a fair amount of time working our way through it. But they also take time. We were talking about money before. If we apply to the Land and Water Fund for a project, we apply in January. We finalize our application in June, right? So you go through, they ask you questions about your application. You talk about the budget, you figure it out, and then so in June you finalize it, and then you hear in September whether you've gotten your grant. So you're 3/4 of a year and you don't even know if you have your money yet. But then they have to do a contract with you, right? So that doesn't usually come out. They do them in September. It doesn't come out until December, sometimes January, sometimes later. It depends on what their legal department is dealing with. So you don't do that. And then it probably takes another year to close. So our projects are routinely 2-year projects, if we're lucky. You can do them faster. If somebody comes to us with cash and wants to donate, it's much faster. If we have to apply for funding from virtually any source, it takes a whole lot longer. So I already started getting into this fee simple land acquisitions. Purchase, bargain, sale is kind of what I was just describing. This is Brumley Nature Preserve, Orange County. It's the one with mountain bike trails and all that kind of stuff. It's really neat. This is one of my projects from 2010. We got money from the North Carolina Land and Water Fund, which was the Clean Water Management Trust Fund at that time. Something like $3 million, $3.2 million from them. Raleigh Watershed Protection Program, which we got about $800,000 from them. Orange County put some money in, not as much. This is actually an order of contribution. The Warner Foundation gave us a fair amount of money. TLC's Land Opportunity Fund, which is individual donors. So we have a Land Opportunity Fund where we have money that we set aside that we will put into land projects, and we use that Land Opportunity Fund for, to make up the difference between what kind of public funding we can get and what we need to pay. And then the Zeist Foundation, which is the foundation that owned the property at the time of the transaction. So the Brumley story is fairly tragic. The Brumley family was in a plane crash in Africa. The entire family was killed. Their assets went to this Zeist Foundation, which was the surviving siblings of the family. It was, anyway, it's a tragedy, but they couldn't just give us the property, right? They didn't. The Zeist Foundation is based in Georgia, primarily an education foundation, but they had this massive asset. At the time of transaction, it was worth between $8 and $12 million. Those were the two appraisals. They were that far apart at the time of the transaction, and so we paid them roughly $5 million or so, for 5.3, I think it was, for the entire property. So we had to go through and do all these applications. We had to figure out where the conservation easement was going to be, because there's a conservation easement when you get money from the Land and Water Fund. They always get a conservation easement on that property. That's what they're interested in, because they want to restrict, in this case, TLC from doing something with that property that they wouldn't allow. So that whole process took us probably 4 years to do that project, something along those lines. And now it's this great nature preserve that has mountain bike trails in the south, and then these hiking trails on the north. It's one of the best birding places in the Triangle. Routinely has the widest variety of birds, oftentimes in the state in the spring and in the fall. If you look at the eBird numbers, it has higher number of species than any other, they call them hotspots, than any place else in the state. That's partly because it's really well known in the birding community, and I looked at it one time, and the number 2 place had, I think, like 5 less species than Brumley, but there had been something like 5 times as many checklists submitted for Brumley Forest. So we had a lot more people looking. So there were very few birds that were missed. The other place probably had other birds too. So anyway, it's a great place to go visit. Yes.
I have a nosy question.
Yeah.
So when you were growing up in Chapel Hill, did you live someplace near where there were woods?
My backyard, my parents had a house with acre and a half or so, and we were on the front, and there was a big slope that went down to a creek, and I had to walk through those woods across the creek to get to Estes Hills Elementary School and Guy B. Phillips. So I walked to school. It was a half mile, it wasn't very far, but I walked to school every day, until it was junior high school at that time too. So through first through ninth, I walked through the woods, and it's kind of a miracle I made it out and didn't just spend my whole time just standing there
So
in the woods.
you met the birds.
Yeah, so I met the birds, and the bird story actually is my grandfather, who was a big birder. He's a forester, who had a degree in forestry. He worked for the Tennessee Valley Authority, but he was in their recreation department. He managed their recreation facilities. He took me out and identified both trees and birds, and I'm really good at the birds. I'm okay at trees. He was really good at trees and okay at birds. Anyway, but for me, it was definitely influence of, and my parents are outdoors kind of people. But yeah, I spent a lot of time in the outdoors, and that's one of the things that we talk about. How do we get other people? How do we get the general public in? I had that advantage. You're nodding. You probably had something similar. Everybody has a different story about that. But how do you make that much wider? So one of the metrics we look at, you try and figure out if you can get people 10 minutes from an open space. That's the big metric. And if it's 10 minutes by car, it's limiting because there's some people that can't use a car. So you really want it to be 10 minutes on foot for people to have access to an open space. And there's been a bunch of stories, or studies. Nicholas School at Duke has done a bunch of different things on this, and so it's that's the barrier you have to knock down. You got to be within 10 minutes of open space for people to be comfortable with it. Then there's a whole other question about, are they comfortable on trails? I was at a meeting one time, and there was this lady, we were talking about going for this hike at the site afterwards, and she was like, well, what kind of trail is it? And I was like, well, trail. And there was no way that this person was going to go on a trail that was like a 3-foot wide natural surface trail. Terrified, snakes, spiders, nature. Just wouldn't do it. And so, and I was like, oh, why? And so you talk through it, and I did get her to go on a hike. It was kind of nice, but that was not something she was going to do. I'm likely to just go where there's not a trail, but for her, and so for a lot of the public, a lot of people, that's a hard thing to get. They're like, oh, I would like a paved trail. I'd like something that's much more cut back and mown, and I can see what's coming at me. So, and I'm not entirely sure how TLC would address that, because we're not likely to create trails that are 10 feet wide. We're really unlikely to create paved trails. We might do an ADA accessible trail. I don't think paving's really expensive for one thing, and it's not great for the environment, so I doubt we would do it. But there's this other side of accessibility. There's a lot of people who don't have mobility issues, and so you want them to be able to access your space as well. So you can't have too steep slope. You can't have, and so not every trail is for every person, but there are hard questions to ask when you're talking about opening your nature preserve. So purchase, bargain, sale. There's donation. South Fork Slopes is one that you all have never heard of. It's not open to the public. A really nice lady gave us 106 acres in northern Orange County. And we were talking about the transaction costs. Those are the ones, that's kind of a list of what you have to pay. And we weren't able to find enough money. She ended up giving us $10,000 in cash in addition to a check, but in addition to the property at the time of transaction. She had lived in Durham for a long time, but she had retired to Kansas, and they had this 106 acre parcel with one little rental cabin on it, and so she and her husband had passed away, no kids, and so she gave it to us, and it was fantastic. It was a great donation. We have since purchased about 80 acres around it from other parcels, so we're almost at 200 acres. We may well open it to the public at some time in the future, although I don't know. It's really close to Little River Regional Park, and the habitat is very similar, so there's no pressing need for another nature preserve there. So it may just be South Creek Slopes. It may just be there, taking care of things. And then there's Bequest. So this is the Urban Nature Preserve in in Orange County, right on the border of Chatham is right there, right on the edge. This was left to us in a will by Eleanor Irvin. And these bequests are really interesting because they come with stipulations. Stipulation of this one is we can't open it to the public unsupervised. So we have two organizations that are there. Up in the front is Transplant Traditions Community Farm, which is a not-for-profit that provides farming opportunities for a refugee community, the Karen community, and they've been there for over a decade now, and they're thriving. They do great work. We also have a group called Learning Outside, which does essentially day camps on that site, and they've been there just as long as Transplant Traditions, and so they host people on that property. But if you go by, you can see a sign, but there's no public. So we do like to know ahead of time if we're going to get the property, so we can know what kind of restrictions are going to come with it. Then conservation easements. We talked a little bit about this already. You work, so it's a voluntary legal agreement. This is a description of what it is. It's this agreement between us and the landowner. They're unique, right? So there's some like a farm easement is very different from what we call a forever wild easement. So we have some forever wild easements, which are, you just really can't do anything. Maybe you do a natural surface trail. Maybe you pick your reserved right. These are all called reserved rights. So these are things that the landowner can do. They usually have to let us know if they're going to do it. So if you're going to conduct forestry operations, we do in general allow that. Not on everyone, but we'll allow it, especially if you've got like a loblolly, big loblolly monoculture. We would encourage you to cut that. For some people, it's really important to be able to cut it for an income source. For others, you want them to cut it so that they can bring in a new habitat type. We've done some forestry work in White Pines Nature Preserve where I think it was Weyerhaeuser that had the property before us. But they had planted a lot of loblolly pine, and we cut virtually all the loblolly pine and had put white pines in from the seed stock of the white pines that were there, which is kind of a unique habitat type for that part of Chatham County. Tends to be too warm for white pines. They're more of a mountain species. But White Pines Nature Preserve has these north-facing slopes that are a little bit cooler. So we have more white pines there. So we do some forestry. It's not something that we encourage, but that's the kind of thing that you can. You have to tailor your conservation easement to tailor it to make sure that the uses that the landowner wants to be able to continue to do are things they can do, and they won't have an impact on the conservation values, right? So if the whole reason we're doing the conservation easement is so that we can protect this habitat type, you can't go cut that whole habitat type. You know, it's a balance. In effect, remove the right to develop land. That's the most monetary value. In general, half the value of the property, the open property, is the value of the conservation easement. So if you have 100 acres and the entire thing is worth $1 million, the conservation easement is probably worth $500,000. Doesn't count buildings, that kind of stuff. And it runs with the land. These pigs, interestingly, are heritage pigs. If you've ever gone to the restaurant Picnic, this is a couple of years old. These pigs are probably gone, but these are in northern Durham County. And if you'd have told me that TLC would take an easement with pigs on it before we did, I would be like, no, we're not doing that. We're not. These are heritage pigs. They didn't get a lot larger than they are now. You can compare the size of those pumpkins. They're small. The meat's leaner, and if you eat, I don't eat it, but if you eat that kind of stuff, it's apparently better. And Picnic for a long time was using exclusively these. I'm not sure if they still do that or not, but they do good things. And we do have some with cattle on it, not very many. If we had our absolute preference, we would have farming uses that are lighter on the land than these kind of more intense uses. But it's a balance, and that's why you have like this easement with these pigs has two big streams, and one of the things we had to do was fence out those streams and fence them further out than the farmer had them before, because they were like within 25 feet, and so there was no way. There was so much runoff coming into those streams, and so it really, we actually got money from the city of Raleigh for water protection for that project, but on the condition that we back those fields, back them out a little bit. What the farmer would like to do is run the pigs through the woods, because they get acorns and they get other things to eat, and it apparently makes the meat taste better. So why consider it if you're a landowner? This slide was created for more for an outreach audience of landowners. Property remains in private ownership. The owner gets to sell it, own it, do what they want to with it. There can be significant estate benefits. The value of the property goes down. So if you have a large estate, you might, and really with the way state laws have changed, it used to be that this came into play more often. It doesn't come into play as much. But there are tax benefits. Both there's a federal tax deduction. Starting next year, there will be another state tax credit. We had a tax credit until 2013. It went away, and it came back this last legislative session for another 2 years. We'll see how long. It may well last longer. They may redo it after that. It's flexible. So yes, sir.
Question, can an individual, so if you live on acreage, can you have a conservation easement, specifically the tax benefits is what I'm most interested in?
Yeah, I mean, more of a, if you're not a farm, it's more of a forever wild kind of easement. The Land and Water Fund that we use to purchase Brumley also funds conservation easements. It depends on the size of your property, so you can get funding for it, or you can get those tax deductions. They're available. It depends on how large the tract is. We have to assess it. But yeah, it's individuals that we get. It's rarely corporate that is doing conservation easements.
What would the minimum be?
Minimum acreage?
Minimum acreage,
Yeah, we don't have that. And it's because it's so unique, right? And I talk and we talk and we talk about priorities, and we talk about what minimum standards there are. And if it's 20 acres in Durham, it's different from 20 acres in Lee County or Chatham County. So it's gonna depend on the conservation benefits. I'm glad to talk with you, more specifically as we go along. There's funding available for some conservation easements. Conservation process, I think I did, yeah, so you all have seen this. It's very involved, right? And it talks about the different steps that we, TLC staff, go through when we do projects like this. When I was thinking about volunteers and volunteers with skills, which you all have skills that other folks don't, there's this thing called a baseline documentary report here that we have to prepare. It involves site visits to the place where you're going. It involves identifying the natural features of that property. I go and do the birds, right? But I don't know the plant types as well. I don't know. I can do the soils because you get soils maps to tell you what's there. Forest types. But so that's the kind of thing where if we can have people who know other parts of the natural features come in and help us, that's a welcome thing that we can do. The rest of the process, it's harder to figure out where you bring volunteers into that process because, unless somebody's really good at grant writing, and some of you might be, but we're pretty good at that ourselves. We kind of loan ourselves out to different groups to write their grants for them. But you go through each of these things, and this can show you why it can take years to go through. You've got all these things that you have to go through. And we, TLC, lives by the standards and practices of the Land Trust Alliance, which is this national organization that tells us how we have to do things. And so, and because we're a member of that group and because we're accredited, so we had to go through this whole accreditation process, which is pretty great, but we have to have policies about, what do you do for appraisals? What standard does it have to be? Everything associated with a land transaction and with the running of the nonprofit has to go through those standard and practices. And so we pay a lot of attention to that. Any questions? Yes?
I don't have a question, I have a comment.
Yeah.
I found that it's helpful before you even get there to have all of the family come together and talk about what their goals are, because often to get to that happy picture with the family,
Yeah.
you have to all agree on how they're going to do this.
I would agree. So could you all hear that? Talking about the family early on. I would agree. I would also say there's a great example in Durham County where the dad who owned the property came and said, I've got to do this before I die and my son gets it because he's going to sell it. So yes, kind of on the same thing, but you also have to know who's in charge. Yes, sir.
I know that you define the conservation process as, I guess, voluntary.
Yeah, so
As far
if
as, like section 106 or like, I know we're not talking about cultural in this, but like I know there's that, so if they had like a cultural resource in the process, or and then there was a forced easement, or what about wetlands mitigation too?
yeah, so I TLC as a not-for-profit private, we don't have power of condemnation. So we cannot, we work voluntarily with people sometimes. That's why we buy, that's why they donate, that kind of thing. So I think that's where you're kind of going. You didn't see in our 4 public benefits the cultural one. So is it ancestral land of some group? Is it, does it have some really important historical thing? That, we tend to focus on nature, not the other side of it. There is money available, and we're allowed to hold land that has those aspects to it, and that if the state is going to put money into that, we can't. We tend not to because it's not really in our sweet spot. But it's a valid reason for land conservation. But really, if you're talking about saying, okay, you cannot develop that property because it has this historic portion to it, there's not much of a role for TLC in that. If the state or the county is going to come in and say, that's almost like, I don't know, it's not really zoning, but it's more like, oh, this this space is too important. And we just don't have that kind of authority. Does that answer?
Well, what about wetlands mitigation too? I guess would be my follow-up to that.
Yeah, so wetlands mitigation generally is funded by the state. And we hold a couple of wetlands mitigation easements, but they, oftentimes that is done by private for-profit companies who assess the land for its mitigation credits or values, whatever it is that's there, and they'll get paid by the state. And oftentimes the state's providing money in certain watersheds to offset the impacts of a highway project. It's oftentimes DOT, but a road project in the same watershed. And so you'll find that like there's, and thinking back to that priority area thing that we said, if you look at it, it depends on, they call them HUCs, but there's HUCs and sub-HUCs. So the relationship is how close does it have to be? And then you can provide, the state will provide money to conserve that property or to restore it, like to plant bare roots or do that kind of stuff. That, we do some of that, but not much. We will do restoration projects on our own property. We hold, I think, 3 or 4 of our, I think we have 180 something conservation easements now. And I think 3 or 4 of those are wetlands mitigation projects, but they're actually ones that we were doing projects with the landowner already, and they can get more money. You can, the money associated with those kind of projects is not based on the value of the property. It's based on the value of what they have to spend on the mitigation. So it's way out of whack. And explaining that to the landowner next door who doesn't have wetlands or doesn't have a stream, you can't get 10,000 an acre for your project, but your next door neighbor can because they've got that stream, is very uncomfortable for me. But yeah, it's uncomfortable. It's true, and it is just like, well, they're getting their money from a different pot, and that pot is not based on the land value. It's based on what they think those credits are worth.
So are you still pulling from the Army Corps and from, I guess, NCDOT for those funds, or is it public agencies you're communicating with?
We don't set those deals up. It's usually the private mitigation firms that do those, and they interact. It's not, I don't think it's the Corps of Engineers. I think the Corps of Engineers has to approve them. The funding comes through the state, and I don't remember which. I don't remember. It's someplace in the Department of Natural Resources that administers it. But we as a not-for-profit can't compete with a mitigation firm that is going to come in and offer all the different things you can do. So there's active mitigation, which is bringing in bulldozers and changing the streams and all that kind of stuff. We wouldn't have anything to do with that. But then there's also mitigation where all you're doing is setting that property aside and maybe planting a bunch of native plants. We're all about that. But we can't compete with the restoration firms that do that when they are first.
It's kind of a big question, but just curious, how you interact with DOT and So I just recently went to a presentation about wildlife connectivity and
Yeah. You went to the CCP?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
So I'm on
exciting.
the steering committee
Okay.
of the of that group. That we call it the Triangle Connectivity Collaborative now, TCC. I live for an acronym, I'll tell you. So the DOT has been much more receptive to that group than it has ever been to us. Which is great, and but if you think about what they said the other day, if you want to protect a wildlife crossing on I-40, a conservation organization has to hold both sides of the road. Well, and so do I need to hold an acre? Do I need 10 acres? What do I need? And when do I have to hold that? And do I go buy it right away? Those are questions I don't really have the answer to. And I know that TLC is not gonna put a bunch of money into property that may get an improved wildlife crossing 15 years from now. We have higher immediate needs than that. That being said, I know, I've looked at that map. I know where New Hope Creek crosses I-40. I know one of the landowners, and I don't think there's going to be a wildlife crossing there because they're doing work right now, and they won't do more work on that section of I-40 for 25 years. That map is really helpful to me in trying to identify where I can be helpful as a land conservation organization on either side of that road or whatever it is we're trying to get a crossing with.
Maybe just kind of expand on that question, or I think that feedback. So, yeah, maybe another question is, where does connectivity, is connectivity kind of a part of y'all's
yes.
picture? Okay.
Absolutely. We use that. So we use a lot of GIS modeling to figure out how to prioritize projects, and the connectivity layer is pretty great. And because I was involved in that project, I got to spend time talking about what would be important to a land conservation organization to know about with connectivity. And so those that don't know, we did this connectivity study. There were 3 indicator species: the box turtle, the bobcat, and the four-toed salamander. And what we figured out is those 3 indicator species, if you had the right habitat for them, you had the right habitat for virtually every other species, plant, animal, otherwise. And so those animals, bobcats need a pretty big space. Box turtles don't really. Four-toed salamanders even less. But what they need is fairly important or fairly specific. And so using those things, those indicators, we figured out, okay, here's Jordan Lake that is this big reservoir that has lots of reservoir both in terms of water but in terms of place for plants and animals. How do we get things to connect from this reservoir to Duke Forest, which is another big reservoir for plants and animals? So how do you find those connections? Anyway, there, and then.
Would you repeat those 4 species, please?
3 species on that one: box turtle, bobcat, and four-toed salamander.
Okay. So how permanent is permanent? If there's a landowner that sets up a conservation easement and then they decide, oh, well, I'd like to sell this, and the developer wants to develop it, can they undo that, or can they appeal anybody to the state legislature who can, overturn things and, decide that they want to rule in the favor of a developer instead of a landowner or something like that?
Yeah. Perpetuity is the word that we use a lot. You can do term conservation easements. We don't do them. Term would be a 10-year easement, 30-year easement, specific term. We don't do those. Our bylaws say that it has to be in perpetuity, which means it's forever. And it's a interest in the property, right? So the legislature, they could condemn it, right? They could send the DTO out and condemn our property. And then, conservation easement, they're unlike, they'd have to do it through like the municipality. But the legislature really can't set it aside like that. They'd have to fundamentally change property rights within the state, and they're not gonna do that. You were in the.
So on the tax credit, is that a one-time tax credit, or is it each year you have that easement, and if it is the latter, if the rules change, you get that benefit?
It's at the time of transaction. The value of it is at the time of transaction. That's a larger question. I don't think we really have time to delve too deeply in it. But you essentially, if the donation is if the property is worth, say, $1 million, and you donate the property to TLC, but we give you $500,000 for it. The $500,000 left is the amount of your donation. You have multiple years to take the donation, to take the deduction, but you only get to take it for that part. But then it's gone into that, and I think that's all we have time for. Yeah, for questions.
I just had 2 quick questions. One of them is there a decides for a parcel of land to be committed to the Land Triangle Land Conservancy?
So, yeah, we look at each project individually, and so no, but we have to look at the conservation values associated with that property. And so if there's high conservation values with a small property, then it's one that we will entertain. We do it on a case-by-case basis. And part of it depends on location. Yeah.
But like, say I had a house and say, you know, the person next door to me is selling their house and they have a little stream and there's little frogs in it or something, you know, like, oh my God, that's the most beautiful trailing arbutus I've ever seen or whatever. Can I like buy that property and then bid to have it conserved in perpetuity so nobody can, you know, so that just.
Yeah, I mean, probably not, because you're talking about a really small space. You know, I don't know if y'all could hear all of that, but it sounds like two lots, like within a neighborhood almost, with like
yeah, like if
forest around
somebody
it.
wanted to do that, I'm just curious, like how detailed it
So the more urban a place becomes, the more important those small places become.
Right.
We have not gotten there yet.
Right,
I have a
right.
friend who works at a land trust in Arlington, Virginia. Very urban, suburban DC. They have 1 acre easements.
Right.
TLC doesn't do that.
But it would be really valuable, like say in the middle of New York City or something.
Yes.
Central Park in
Exactly.
New York City. Central Park, New York City without Central Park would be,
Yeah.
it would be like Blade Runner or something.
Yeah.
Like the worst thing
Yeah.
imaginable.
Yeah.
But I have one other very quick question.
Yes.
Okay, my friends told me of this terrible thing called like the Board of Governors of North Carolina.
That's the university.
The Board of Governors is for the UNC system.
Yeah, for the UNC system.
Okay, because.
So I'm gonna redirect
Okay.
that.
Okay, yeah.
Well, that's not an important question.
Yeah, so we can talk about that
Okay.
sometime. So
I can
I'll
ask my
just
question
sum up
later.
really quick and say that those 3 ways that we protect land, right? The easement, the transfer and ownership. Those are the ways, that's like your toolbox. That's what, so when we look at this case study, that is, for us to do permanent conservation, you have to get it into one of those boxes.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Yeah.